I am Dr. Charlie Yarish at the University of Connecticut in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. Today, we are going to be having a short course through ATEC's Algae Culture Extension course that will introduce you to the integrated multi-trophic aquaculture of seaweeds, shellfish, and fish. Well, there has been a growth of aquaculture globally. And as we take a look at the growth of aquaculture, along with the growth of aquaculture in the last couple of decades, have been some very significant issues. Along with the growth of aquaculture, which is heavily dominated by animal aquaculture, there has been a steady increase in marine plant production. Roughly, if we look at the 2017 reports from the FAO, which describes production in 2016, we see there's 27 million metric tons having a value of roughly around $6 billion a year. And the marine plant aquaculture or seaweed aquaculture has been growing over 8% per year since 1970. So understanding that there has been an increase in global production of finfish aquaculture and other animal aquaculture, along with marine plant aquaculture, gives us some very unique opportunities, because when we're dealing with finfish aquaculture and shrimp aquaculture are sometimes referred to as fed aquaculture. You feed fish, you feed shrimp, and the animals have to release their nutrients as they process their food. As a consequence, if your animals in your confined area are releasing nutrients, these nutrients can overload coastal waters, and these coastal waters can develop problems with harmful algal blooms, or sometimes what we call green tides, and these are tides, areas of other species of algae that are opportunistic, growing in the coastal waters, assimilating the nutrients, and then when they are producing, they can be produced in such high quantities, you can see how they can cover beaches. Well, in 2008, there was a massive bloom of a green seaweed called ulvar or sea lettuce. It almost actually caused a postponement of the Olympics in the Chinese city of Qingdao. Well, when we take a look at what fueled this bloom of the seaweeds, we have to take a look at the major sources of nutrients. Besides people's releasing nutrients in coastal waters through their sewage treatment plants, there was intense levels of finfish aquaculture and shrimp aquaculture in this area of northern China. And you can see here this individual there being covered with some of these seaweeds. Well, those particular seaweeds that started growing or blooming there are an expression of using those nutrients that were found in these coastal waters. So we have to be cognizant that finfish aquaculture, shrimp aquaculture have to deal with nutrient release. And they've got to deal with it by trying to get a better feeding regimes, increasing the assimilation of the food that the animals are eating. And we have to do this to maintain the quality, environmental sustainability of our coastal waters. Well, the technique that we use is a technique called IMTA. It's an approach which is leading towards a balanced ecosystem approach. What is IMTA? You combine the aquaculture of finfish and shrimp, which are fed aquaculture, and you combine this aquaculture with extractive organisms that can use the inorganic nutrients like seaweeds, or organisms that can use the organically bound nutrients like mollusks or shellfish. So organisms like seaweeds and shellfish and aquaculture systems are extractive organisms. They're extracting nutrients from the water. Combining it with fed aquaculture, you can develop a balanced ecosystem approach, which we call IMTA, or integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. And in this image here, you can see the shellfish to the right being mussels. It could be other shellfish like oysters. There's a picture of a nori net, which is a red seaweed, and then you can see some of the finfish that are growing in the pens in this picture in the upper left. But what I'd like to give is a little bit of a historical introduction of IMTA for New England, because this introduction took place up in the state of Maine. It took place in the state of Maine, up in an area called Copska Bay area, and it involved the initial cultivation of a red seaweed called pyropia, or porphyra, being the old name of this particular species. A small little company called Coastal Plantations International was trying to grow their porphyra, or pyropia, in a coastal bay which didn't have any nutrients, and they weren't very successful. But then when we started looking around the different bays of Maine, we noticed that the native species of pyropia were doing just great in and around farms growing finfish. And so that leads us to the idea, perhaps you can transfer the seaweed cultivation, move it in areas in close proximity of your finfish cultivation. And indeed, in 1995, we did such an experiment. Now, nori, the common name of this red seaweed, is very, very expressive. It lets you know when it's not happy. Happy nori is the image to your left, and sad nori is the image to the right. The image to the right is nori that is not growing in an environment that has enough nutrients to support its growth. Happy nori is growing in an environment where there's a surplus of nutrients. And so this opened up this idea, let's try to do a polyculture of growing nori in an area with finfish. So if pyropia requires all of the nutrients, carbon dioxide, ammonia, and phosphate that fish produce as waste products, why not grow them together? And indeed, we did an experiment with finfish aquaculture up in Maine that capitalized on the liquid waste that would principally be being released by our finfish. And we did this experiment in Copska Bay with a small company that was trying to grow nori called Coastal Plantations International. Well, they were having a problem with their nori farm that they were trying to get off and to develop. They had very unsuccessful crops because there wasn't enough nutrients in the area where they were permitted to grow their nori. But when we took the nori nets and moved them near finfish farms, and that's the finfish farms there are from salmon, we noticed that the nets reddened up very rapidly. We had very, very happy nori. And we were able to figure out how many nets we would need to grow of the nori to remediate a certain amount of nutrients produced by fish. So what is integrated multi-trophic aquaculture that is relevant to where we are in New England? We could take a look at a very nice characterization that was produced by Dr. Thierry Chopin. And there you can see the fed aquaculture, the finfish, principally in New England. That finfish is going to be salmon. Growing it in close proximity of shellfish, such as blue mussels. And then in a curtain Around your aquaculture of your finfish and blue mussels, you have the seaweeds such as kelp. Now, keep in mind, you're growing now organisms that are doing different ecosystem services. Ecosystem services for extracting nutrients. The shellfish, the mussels, are extracting organically bound nutrients from the water. The seaweeds are extracting inorganic nutrients from the water. And this will mitigate the nutrients that are being released by the fed aquaculture of salmon. Of course, not all nutrients are going to be in the water column. Some of the fish will also produce feces that will just fall out of the water column before they're intercepted by your shellfish or the inorganic nutrients, and they will then fall to the bottom. But on the bottom, in the area where you are practicing your IMTA, you can have nets that have extractive organisms there. You can grow sea cucumbers down on the bottom beneath the pen. You can grow certain types of marine worms down on the bottom. Those organisms that are deposit feeders are also extracting organic particles out of the water as they're falling down to the bottom and converting this into very important products that have significant markets. So when we take a look at IMTA, we've shown you some open water situations that have been done in New England and also the Canadian Maritime provinces. But I'd like to also introduce you to IMTA that was initially done in Chile. And when we take a look at IMTA, we can work with open water systems. And in Chile, they have worked with open water systems growing the giant kelp or macrocystis. They also have done similar work with shellfish like mussels. They've also done work with the principal source of nutrients in their coastal waters, which are the salmon. But you can also have more controls if you're growing your finfish on land. So in this image right here to the left, in a land-based system, you can have your finfish on the top, and by gravity, you can take the waste products from the finfish aquaculture, pass it through shellfish, and then ultimately pass the liquid waste from the shellfish ponds or tanks into tanks that are holding the seaweeds. And this is also a land-based IMTA system. So when we take a look at our land-based IMTA system, it has all the important components. You have the inflow of your system. You have your fed aquaculture of your finfish. The finfish release certain nutrients. That nutrient waste goes into your mollusk tank, your shellfish tank, and then ultimately the liquid waste that are available from the mollusk tank can go into growing your seaweed. And in this particular case there, you can see the seaweed. It's a seaweed called Gracilaria, and this is a seaweed that lends itself very nicely for land-based cultivation. The outflow of the water that you release back into the sea, it will have less nutrients in it and will then increase the sustainability of growing your land-based aquaculture in nearshore environments. So in addition, when we look at our model of growing seaweeds, and indeed, like I mentioned before, Professor Bushman and his colleagues in Chile, principally in the area of Chile called Portamon, where you have most of the salmon aquaculture there, they have now developed their IMTA system that has been successful with the salmon, and this includes their shellfish being an oyster species, And they've also grown not only the kelp, but also they've introduced another seaweed, the red seaweed called gracilaria, because gracilaria grows at lower light levels. And so what they're using in this whole system is the entire water column and maximizing the nutrients that are going into the tissue of economically important marine organisms that all have particular markets. Well, where are we today with IMTA? IMTA initially started in a very humble bay in the state of Maine in open water conditions. It migrated into areas of New Brunswick, Canada, and from there it has expanded to different areas of the world. And many, many different countries are practicing IMTA. Some IMTA practices have been around for a very long period of time. People call those polyculture, but they were actually IMTA, Integrated Multi-Trophic Aquaculture. In this particular slide, you can see the expansion of IMTA globally for different seaweeds, green seaweeds, brown seaweeds, and some of the red seaweeds. Now, FAO has an excellent technical publication on IMTA. It gives an historical introduction to IMTA, and it's really recommended that this technical publication is a must-read to see the historical information on IMTA and how it is practiced in different areas of the world. Now, in addition, IMTA can be used as a form of coastal zone management. It would be very appropriate if you're growing fed aquaculture is trying to integrate that fed aquaculture in marine bays with the extractive aquaculture, and this leads then to AquaPark zoning. And in this particular slide there, you can see how you can start doing that. Well, AquaPark zoning is just an expression of IMTA making it useful. Today in Korea is faced with a big issue. In areas where there's seaweed cultivation, they're doing very well. In areas where there is animal aquaculture, shellfish and finfish, they are separated from the seaweed aquaculture. And when we look at this separation, you just imagine you can get green tides, harmful algal blooms in areas where you have your fed aquaculture. So now the Koreans are working at integrating through coastal zone management plans where they are siting their fish farms with shellfish farms and seaweeds in particular bays. And this is going to be the way that we're going to have to see that we will have to follow the growth of fed aquaculture in open water systems and integrate this with shellfish and seaweeds to maintain environmental sustainability. Another area where we have a nice opportunity is in the planning of wind farms. If you're going to have wind farms, you're going to have boats going out to your wind farms, why not have aquaculture systems in and around the wind farms? You can have your aquaculture systems like your finfish near the wind farms, and you should be able to move in your extractive organisms like your shellfish and your seaweeds. And this would improve the bottom line for the operators of the farms, the wind farms, as well as improving the operators of the farms that are growing finfish, seaweeds, and shellfish together.